high level-ish, because we've got, Nathan, coming in.
We are on 3.1.
Yeah.
So again, in the package, there's a 2.1 and a 3.1.
Yeah, in the future, we can just keep them.
Okay.
Yeah, but Morgan's doing a rock
Doing
star
due
job.
diligence.
Just wanna-
Am I live saying that, I hope?
Yeah.
In case you're family and pressure watching everybody at the University of Vermont. 3.1, and.
Some people like to see all the versions.
Yeah, some people do.
Center.
Uh,
I'm not criticizing him. I want to understand,
might
maybe there's a reason why.
I'm really laughing because I thought we're all fair. All the versions there, open them up.
So far.
3.1,
3.1.
Okay. St. James.
That's St. James Office of Legislative Counsel. So draft 3.1 of S204. Yellow are changes from draft 2.1, and they are almost exclusively based on Gwen Carmoli's suggestions to you all from last week. And the green highlighting is just decision points that have not been decided yet. So the first decision point, so the first change is on page 1, line 8.
Yeah.
There was a recommendation to make it clear in the title of the statute that this was for specific grades. So kindergarten through grade 3 reading assessment intervention is now the new title of this statute.
Right.
Again, decision point on line 10 there on page 1, just there has
So just to
been
confirm, sorry to interrupt. So this will happen in kindergarten, or it'll happen in first grade, it'll happen in second grade?
kindergarten through grade
So
3.
every year,
Well, it depends on the screener that's used. So let's read through the bill. So again, just flagging a decision point, there has been discussion about defining universal reading screener, but we haven't talked about whether or not you all want to add a definition there. So I'm just leaving that there. So you tell me otherwise. So subsection B requires AOE to update and publish a list of screeners to be used by SUs, and then again, decision point of whether or not we're going to require approved independent schools to participate in this process. For determining reading skills and identifying students in kindergarten through grade 3, demonstrating reading struggles. So again, we're adding that kindergarten through grade 3 requirement here, or age reference here. I changed the wording around a little bit, but the substance of it is the same. It's only just, we're just adding kindergarten through grade 3. I'm trying to, again, knowing that we're working towards voting this out eventually, trying to tighten up some of the language here. So this began by just saying that the agency's guidance, and I'm looking at subdivision 2, would include, and then we move on to page 2, and it includes all of that meaty, juicy requirements on measuring skills based on grade level predictive measures. But there wasn't really anywhere in the bill that talked about guidance. So I modified this a little bit to say that the agency's review of universal and reading screeners and assessments has to include a review of the evidence base of the screeners and assessments. And then in publishing it, and that should be the list, required under subdivision 1 of this section, the agency shall issue guidance on measuring skills based on grade level predictive measures. I think they already.
No, go ahead, finish your talk.
I think that some of this language came in the original iteration of the amendment to this bill, and so I think AOE is already issuing guidance. But that's not clear in this bill. If you were just looking at the statute, it talks about AOE guidance has to include all of these things. But there was nowhere in the bill that talked about what that guidance was or required AOE to issue the guidance. So I just changed the wording around a little bit to make it clear.
Okay, so as we're going through, can we comment? Because I don't think we need a definition of universal reading screener.
Great, I'll think about
Unless someone wants to speak up. But it seems like every time I've looked, I've like researched online, which is 50% AI apparently, but there's a general understanding that there's this universal reading screener and that it's not a fixed thing, it's adaptable and, but there's an understanding of what it is, so I think we should, unless someone proves me wrong.
No, I'm just gonna, so could somebody make a mistake in terms of hiring somebody locally? You know what I'm saying? Because you're talking about who you can use for a universal screener, correct?
Well, it's not a thing though.
It's not a thing, it's a,
It's a quiz, a test, it's a little,
Tool.
yeah, it's a tool. It's usually kind of like a, what's the word, not a summative assessment, but a, oh my god, I've been out of education too long.
so there's no,
It's a little.
is it
assessment.
possible from a consumer protection standpoint, that somebody could, use the wrong tool? Are we worried about that at all?
Well, that's
Did any-
why the agency of ed have to publish a list, so they really need to be the ones
Okay,
that make
right.
sure it's
Yep,
up to snuff. So I guess I feel alright. with it.
beautiful, okay. You okay with it? Yeah. Great, okay.
I don't know how you guys wanna make the decision point around approved independent schools.
Personally, I'm inclined to keep approved independent schools in there, but I think we should test because I do think there are some schools out there, frankly, whether they come from public schools or independent schools, the independents I think are concerned about, and some of the publics, what's happening from those earlier kids. So something should be.
Yeah, and if you all don't want them to be in there, that's okay with me too.
No, I
Not
think,
gonna hurt.
I think we're moving in that direction. I just want to get out of this.
Okay.
So the next change is on page 3, subsection C, starting on page or on line 3. This is the telling all of the schools that they need to actually use the universal reading screeners and screen students. You heard testimony from Gwen about, there were kind of 2 different age groups here. So one is the universal reading screeners. Schools shall screen all students in K through grade 3 using age and grade level appropriate universal reading screeners. And then if you go down to line 7, screening for dyslexia characteristics shall be administered for students attending kindergarten or 1st grade in public schools and approved independent schools. And so Gwen's feedback to you all was, I'm reading directly from here, clarify grade levels for screening for dyslexia characteristics. So I've flagged that. I don't have the expertise to speak to what this should be, whether the language should read as is for dyslexia characteristics, or it should be tied to different grades. So Gwen has pointed out that's an area that needs to be, she would recommend shored up. So
Yeah.
just pointing that
Oh,
out.
this what page?
3.
3,
Is the issue here that the K through 1 doesn't sort of line up with the K through 3, which is all over the rest of the mill?
yes, and so, but to me, not knowing anything about screening students for reading ability or dyslexia characteristics, it's possible that those are 2 different things and therefore should be administered at different times. I don't know that.
And Gwen didn't give I don't remember, she didn't give a suggestion?
She said clarify grade levels for screening for dyslexia characteristics.
What's the controversy then? Go ahead.
So the bill requires on lines 3 through 7. The use of the universal reading screeners in K through 3.
Mhm.
But then in lines 7 through 9,
Right.
it says you screen for dyslexia characteristics in kindergarten or 1st grade. And so Gwen's suggestion to you is literally clarify grade levels for screening for dyslexia characteristics. And that would be beyond my expertise. That would be someone you have
just,
to hear from the field.
10,000-foot question. So is kindergarten mandatory?
No,
Okay. So maybe they're trying to scoop up all the kids that didn't go to kindergarten, they're at least catching by 1st grade. So instead of saying just kindergarten, you tested in kindergarten, you gotta catch the kids that didn't go to kindergarten.
That might
That's
be it,
one.
actually, that might be it.
yes, but I think, yes, I believe that's why there's an or there. But I think Gwen's point to you is, are you being intentional with requiring a reading screener in grades K through 3 and only referencing screening for dyslexia characteristics in K or grade 1. Is that an intentional choice and the choice you need to make? Or is that an oversight somewhere in the drafting? And that would be a subject matter expert question. But I agree with Senator Weeks that that or is probably meant to capture kiddos who are in school for the first time, first grade.
Senator Doolittle, do you mind looking into that?
I do not mind, I can do
That
that.
would be great. There is something I think, well, we'll go Senator Doolittle.
And then on page 5, there's a couple words that were changed here or there, not substantively, like I added guardian where there was the word parent. I added a reference to a further section. But for the interest of time, the big decision point, page 5, lines 3 through 6, is just what do you want to do about engaging local stakeholders? Do you like this language? This language is referring to asset mapping and a local literacy plan, which is a public school concept. Do you want anything in here about engaging local stakeholders? Do you want to just say that they engage local stakeholders?
I'm looking at Senator Kulik on this one because I'm not really, well, I mean, I'm just not sure what that's all about still.
That's fine, can we hear from the AOE what they're doing now?
Sure, okay.
And then on page,
So would it be the AOE, what they're doing now, or would it be?
I mean, I think so,
Okay.
it must be something that's mandated from the AOE, right?
Okay. So we can find that out. We can do it.
and then page 6, section 2 is new. The first section required AOE to draft a parental notification plan if your kiddo is identified as having a reading deficiency. And I think AOE pointed out in testimony, you should probably direct us to do that rather than just put it in the statute. So this is that direction. So on or before November 1st, 2024, AOE has to develop and issue the recommendations for the substance and form of the parental or guardian notification required under the Universal Screener statute. And then the agency's recommendations have to be consistent with applicable state and federal law, as well as legislative intent, and that draws in the special education laws that already talk about how if your kiddo qualifies for special education purposes, how some of that notification has to flow. And I think that's it. So for changes.
It's great. The only question I have is I've been getting a lot of outreach on 3Qing. And Senator Buick, did you reference that early on that you thought maybe somewhere we should say 3Qing is a bad idea?
Yes, 3Qing is a bad idea.
Right.
And
People are looking
it
for,
was in the initial bill.
Right.
Called out, and then it's E.
Mhm.
Oral text reading accuracy, what page?
Page 4, subsection E.
cleaners use evidence for pursuing instruction.
Right, and then, okay,
Okay,
so
so, yeah, go ahead.
what we were told is that we should be consistent with the language.
Okay.
So that whatever's in this bill is consistent with like pedagogy, educational policy, and special education rules. And so that's what we've tried to do here. I know some people are upset that that very explicit language, putting kind of a moratorium on 3Qing is not here.
But this is for consistency
That
purposes.
we're
No,
trying
that
to
I can get back to
consistent.
people.
And it is explained in the language, like this is what it's saying, don't do this, which
Right.
is 3Qing. It just doesn't say the word.
Thank you.
3Qing. Okay. Also, by the way, I think we can take I will double check this, guys, but I think we could take the dyslexia screening out. Which would make everything a lot easier.
Can you check that? I know for some of my constituents, the dyslexia thing is really important.
I think the universal screeners will do that work.
Okay.
I think it's redundant. to
Okay,
have
you
that
would
there.
check just to make
I'll
sure that
double
it's
check.
redundant.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay. Okay, can we set that aside for now?
Yeah.
Good, okay,
Fair enough.
thank you. See, yeah, okay, great. Great. All right, final piece of business for the day, S 191. an act relating to New American Advancement Grant applicants. Nathan, are you with us?
Yes, hello. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes. Nathan, how do you pronounce your last name?
Virag, Virag. Yep.
Welcome, Mr. Virag. We're really grateful to Senator Hashim and to you for spending some time with us this afternoon on S-191. And senators, this is S-191 is in our folders. Split out. And I am going to, so this is a bill that I'm sure you've had an opportunity to look at, Mr. Virag, and I think I'll just pass it on to you unless Senator Hashim wants to say anything or do any introductions.
No, Nathan, it's good to see you again. I think there are just some general questions about the refugee asylum seeker process, the differences between them, and when that status of technically being a refugee, when that actually confers on someone. So, and based on your experience as an immigration attorney, I figured it'd be great to have you in for a little bit. And yeah, thank you for making the time.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much. Yeah, I don't know how you want to do it, if people just want to ask questions or.
So you've looked at the bill. I think one thing would be, do you have any concerns with the bill in general as written, given your experience as an immigration attorney?
I think the bill looks great. It's important that it distinguishes between asylees and asylum seekers. So I did see that, as well as special immigrant visa holders. So I think the language is there.
Okay.
I'm
Yes, please.
just wondering, before we jump off that topic. What you just said about asylum seekers and asylum, you had another word, asylees. Can you give just a profile, just kind of an overview of asylees? Like, what does that really mean, and what does that denote?
Sure, absolutely. So asylum seekers, they have come to the United States after fleeing their countries, their home countries. So they're applying for asylum. They're not necessarily going to get asylum. So it kind of leaves them in an uncertain status for many, many years, depending on what country they're coming from. And I'm only saying that because of the recent Afghan situation. And for asylees are people who have been granted asylum status. So they do have permission to stay in the United States indefinitely. They're not considered permanent residents. They have to apply for their green card or permanent residency a year after being granted asylum and being in the United States.
Okay, thank you. And
Yeah.
and this is, maybe it's a Senator Hashim. There was at one point, I thought, in this bill, a list of there it is, line 7, page 1.
I think we also, however, made some amendment. I don't know if this is the current version of the bill. I believe that we cross-reference federal law as well.
Was Bethany James the drafter?
Yes, and we had a walkthrough of it last time. I'm just trying to find the current version of the bill.
Is it on the
Yeah,
webpage?
It should be.
This one's as introduced.
Right.
It's today's best.
Actually, she may not have made it change it. Morgan, do you mind checking?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, we have a 1.1.
I see it now. Yeah, I've got it. There's a potential amendment that we have, which, one second.
In 1.1, the list is gone.
Yeah. Yeah, so the potential amendment that we had given to us adds. Yeah, it refers to. Well, never mind, it doesn't cross-reference federal law. It's talking about 2185C, which is the immigration status statute.
Yeah, there's such a.
Yeah, and 2185C discusses refugees, humanitarian parolees, and special immigrants, special immigration Afghan visa status.
Okay. So. Well, we have Nathan on.
Yeah.
Do you mind if I ask?
Please, no, I want you to.
So in the current bill language, we're referring back to a Vermont statute that includes refugee, parolee, and special immigrant visa. So refugee, if they're given the broad brush of refugee status, they're not asylees. That's right. Asylum seekers. They're seekers. Are they still seekers, or are they bona fide vetted refugees? I mean, the parolee and the special immigration visas are very specific. They've already gone through the processing and they've been accepted. A refugee is pretty generic, isn't it?
No.
No. Okay, that's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
Let's pull it apart.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So refugee is specific only because the United States breaks it up: refugee, asylee, humanitarian, parole. Refugee, if people are being admitted to the United States as refugee, that means one, they have permission to stay in the United States, and they have permission to work, right? As soon as they come into the United States, then after a year, kind of like if you're granted asylum, after a year, you're granted refugee status, then you apply for your lawful permanent resident status. It's a little confusing because they do have permission to stay here if you are admitted as a refugee.
Okay, so can you help me out with, given permission to stay here?
Sure.
I think in some cases isn't any more onerous than they cross the border and they put their hand up as a refugee and they've been registered, they're in the system. Isn't that kind of the end of that designation? I mean, they're not officially they're not parolees, they're not special immigrants. It's just they're in the US and they've claimed asylum, economic or whatever asylum reasons that they're using. But that's kind of the end of the adjudication until they're actually processed. Is that?
Those aren't covered in with the change that we made. Asylum seekers are not.
Yeah, but refugee is.
Yeah, and Nathan, can you talk about the refugee process and how long it takes to actually get refugee status designation? And
Yeah.
is that like
Yes, please. Yeah. I'm sorry to be so all over the map. I'm just trying to figure out.
No.
Mean something. And
That's completely fine. It's the US has a very complicated system with the classification. So refugees, it's actually a very difficult process. You have to register as a refugee in a different country. So asylum is only for people who are in the United States, or, well, I won't get into it, but if you're bringing family members, if you were granted asylum. But so refugee is you're already essentially granted refugee status overseas, and then you're working with a resettlement agency to come to the United States to resettle here in the United States. It can take many, many years to even get to that process. But to answer your question, essentially, yes, as soon as they are admitted as refugees, then they're fine. But it's a pretty significant process to even get to that point.
okay. And then major difference between refugee and asylee. And asylee is not part of the language in the current bill, correct?
just double checking because
Because we've removed that short list. We referred back to 2185.
it's 2185, and what I'm seeing here, and Beth also one of our helpful colleagues printed out 2185C language for us.
Yeah.
And the list is folks who qualify as a refugee pursuant to 8 U.S. Code 1101. 2 is granted parole to enter the U.S. pursuant to 8 U.S.C. 1182. And then 3 is issued a special immigrant visa pursuant to the Afghan Allies Protection Act of 2009, as amended.
Okay, so the asylees is not even it's not part of the bill. It's not a consideration of the bill.
I'm not seeing it as that. I would want
It's
to
gone.
confirm with Beth.
Yeah, it was in the original, but now it's gone.
Yeah, because we're cross-referencing 2185C, and I'm not seeing asylees in 2185C.
Okay,
Actually,
clear.
Nathan, you might be the person to ask, are asylees or asylum seekers covered under the Vermont statute 2185C that determines residency?
I believe not, and I will say, out of all, I mean, obviously, all of them, all of the classifications are very vulnerable, but the people that get the less benefits from state or resettlement agencies would be asylum seekers. I would say they're the most vulnerable, and then second would be asylees. They're just not afforded protections. I honestly, that might be my fault. I might not have the most up-to-date version because I do see refugees, asylees, asylum seekers, humanitarian paroles, or special immigrant visa holders.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry. I just sent to our committee assistant to email you the amendment that we have.
Okay.
You should be getting that in a moment. Sorry, you didn't have that in advance.
No, that's not a problem. I was trying to look online.
I have a question, Nathan.
Yeah.
It's a generic, I'm a layman, I don't understand anything, but in recent, last 2 years, people coming across our southern border, for example, and the gotaways that they talk about, those people have never been processed. So if they make it to Vermont and wanna, partake in this program, how are we gonna vet those?
Yeah, and in coming through the southern border, we've obviously seen that increase in the last several years. Either way, so most people, at least most of the clients I see that are coming from the southern border, people have what I would say is a legitimate asylum claim. So they're fleeing their country, they're in danger, and it's based on their livelihood, as far as harm, torture, things like that. And the US government doesn't always recognize that. So I've seen that come up as an issue. I think as far as vetting, we've seen the same issues over time, and that's why the United States have implemented certain policies. So like now we have an expedited pathway for Afghans.
Yep.
But to answer your question, I mean, it's hard. I think a lot of people do have legitimate asylum claims that do come through the southern border. I can give you an example. There are a few Afghans who actually came that route. They would have qualified. They would have qualified in 2021 to enter, but they couldn't because they either fled to like a different house. The airport was an entirely crazy situation, so they just didn't feel safe doing it. So they missed the opportunity to come in through that special program. So even if they worked with the United States or their lives were seriously in danger, the only way that they could come is through the southern border. I think a majority of people are good actors, but right, unfortunately, you may have a few in there that don't, but a majority of them do.
Right, so if they're a refugee, an asylee, then they've come through a checkpoint, they've been processed by Border Protection or one of the other alphabet agencies. And they have papers. I can see, and I've had the government deal with my personal records and screw them up before. So how are we gonna know in Vermont whether they're, what their actual status is? Now I get it, they get across the border and they don't speak the language and they're scared and they only know what they've been told, so I'm not holding it against them.
Yeah, right. And that's a good point. So, yes, although anybody who enters the United States without, when I say without permission, I just mean they come to the border and they claim asylum. So they're kind of waived in and then they're giving paperwork. So they have the like things, they have their biometrics taken, things like that. They have notice to appear in court if they're put into immigration proceedings, which would be a majority of them unless you're granted humanitarian parole or come in as with legal permission. So they do have documentation. They have to check in with immigration's custom enforcement. They're very strict on that. You have to check in. If you move, you have to change your address. So they do have tabs and they do have paperwork. As far as status, right? They're kind of in that limbo status. So they have essentially when you come into the United States with like in removal proceedings because you didn't have permission to enter, you'll have a court date. So you have to show up to that court date. That's often 1 or 2 years in advance. So essentially you're allowed to stay here until you have that hearing, whether they determine if you qualify for asylum. Or have a different way to adjust your status.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Senator Rashid.
Nathan, would you also be able to talk about the second category, which is folks who are granted parole to enter the US pursuant to 8 USC 1182, and any differences between the refugee process?
Sure. So when you're paroled into the United States, it's only for a specific amount of time. For the Afghans, we saw it initially be a 2-year period. So every Afghan that came here under our Allies Welcome program only had permission to stay here for 2 years, and then they had to either apply for asylum or apply for a green card if they qualified. Then we saw the US realize it was taking way too long to process all the Afghans, so they extended the parole either automatically or you had to apply. It was good for another 2 years. So parole is only temporary. You have to apply for a different status after that expires. We've seen that mainly people coming from specific countries like Afghanistan or other countries, there's temporary protected status, but I won't get into that. It's only temporary. So yeah, parole just affords people status, I guess you could say, for a temporary amount of time.
Thank you. And I just want to again distinguish, based on the conversation, that asylum seekers and asylees are significantly different than folks who are granted refugee status.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, it's, okay, again, thank you, Nathan. So to that same conversation, parolees are not a subset of asylum seekers, right? It's a completely different designation.
Exactly. Although most of those people probably end up applying for asylum, but right, it's not connected in that way.
Thank you.
What's the process to be granted parole status? Is it as in depth as going through the refugee status, or is it how's it different?
It's probably not as in depth, to be honest. It's difficult. The only reason Afghans were granted parole was because the United States came out with our Allies Welcome. I think if everybody showed up at the border, I don't think the US would grant everybody parole. So it's not easy, unfortunately. And honestly, I haven't worked too much with parolees besides Afghans. So I haven't seen it. It happens, but it's not. I mean, refugee isn't easy either, but
Is there any sort of vetting process?
yeah, definitely. So I mean, I would argue that anytime immigration benefit is granted, there's definitely a vetting process. It's a long one, and that's why a lot of times it's delayed. A lot of security checks, qualifications, documents, and things like that. So it is extensive. The US is very hesitant to grant status.
Nathan, just a curiosity question, because you seem, obviously intimately familiar with the Afghan refugee processing. Can you comment on how that's going now? I mean, certainly there were flags that went up, a year or two ago about, and you alluded to kind of slow processing. How's it going now? Is it improved?
Not really. I hate to sound like a critic. I mean, I will say that most of my asylum cases have been approved to this point, which is great. It's a stepping stone. We're seeing a long delay in family reunification. So actually, a lot of clients are, asking me to contact Congress, just because it's so delayed and people are just, fighting for their lives. So, I don't know that I guess I could say it improved as far as like asylum approval, but as far as getting families here, it's been very, very slow.
Thank you.
How you feeling about the bill?
I think it's great.
Great, I appreciate that confidence. How's everybody else feeling about the bill?
Time and support.
Great, yeah. So we've got Scott Giles coming in, I think Thursday, and then I believe Susan Stigley wants to come in. Oh, no, that's something else. So Scott will come in and hopefully move it forward.
Scott Giles again is.
He's the he's my student assistant corporation. Yeah, we had a couple questions for him. That was incredibly helpful, all of that, Mr. Virag, and very generous of you to take your time to be with us. It's a complicated area of law, and you clearly understand it. So thank you very, very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Follow up.
Just a quick, so for your billable hours, that's
That would be Senator Campion, actually.
I'll direct it to him, yes.
Where are we finding you, by the way? Are you down in Brattleboro area? Is that right?
No, so because I work with a lot of the Brattleboro folks from ECDC, but I'm based at Association of Africans Living in Vermont, so that's in Burlington.
Terrific. Great.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for all that you're doing. That was
Yeah,
great.
thank you all. So I
All right.
appreciate you all.
Yeah,
Good
bye-bye.
seeing you.